All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about optimizing customer service with Salesforce native process mining and AI. Jeremy and I are really excited to share with you today some of the work we've been doing around how you can approach customer service in Salesforce. Both Jeremy and I have been in the ecosystem for over 11 years, worked at Traction on Demand from the early days, and that's where I met Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely. Been around for a decade or so now. Lots of different types of projects, and many of those in the service space, and often led to building a lot of like reusable things that we would do to start off a lot of our different projects there while we were working in building products and stuff there. So
yeah, it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun digging into the Service Cloud implementations back in the day, and exciting to see the new capabilities on the platform that we're going to share with you today. So what we're really going to focus on is basically how Hubbl accelerates your customer service optimization and leveraging the Hubbl Technologies platform, how you can take this full circle approach in terms of understanding essentially where your bottlenecks are on the platform, so you can basically get to better design outcomes in terms of accelerating your customer service, whether that's agents or just new automation on the platform in general. And then, once you identify, as a contact center owner or service owner, you're essentially identifying those areas, and then you want to find a way to implement how you can implement those changes. Oftentimes there's technical debt or challenges that might slow down that implementation. So we're going to be talking about how we can accelerate identifying those issues and resolving those. And then we'll move into sort of how, once you roll that out, a key component of this, of course, is just getting a sense of the ROI from that implementation that you've rolled out in terms of new automation. And once we get that visualization going and going to share that with stakeholders, the next challenge is just a continual cycle of finding the next bottleneck so you can customize your processes even better. So what we'll be doing is sort of walking you through these processes and get you an understanding of how you can leverage the platform through a series of live demos just focused on these different areas. So in the first piece here, we're talking about the concept of thinking about data-driven business process workshops, where you're leveraging the first time we've ever had a process mining application that's built natively on top of Salesforce. This is just a sort of screenshot to give you a high-level view. What we'll do is we'll jump into a demo to give you a sense of how this is actually working, and allowing you to make better use of your stakeholder time and getting better design outcomes. This is what we really are moving towards. So, Jeremy, why don't we jump into process analytics and get a sense of what it's like to look at cases inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Process analytics. And the way I like to think about this is if you're going into those business process workshops and you're working with your stakeholders, going through current state. Think about how this could actually accelerate the work that you're doing there.
Totally. So what we're looking at right now is our visualization component. So there's kind of three main sections in PA that you'd use right now. One is like an initial setup to get to this visualization. Then you have this visualization, and then you also have the ability to save these views and compare them. When we're looking at a visualization, what we're looking at here is all these different blocks that represent steps in a process, and all these different arrows, which we call segments, which are going from one step in a process to another. If you think of like a most simple service case process, it's probably something that looks something like this, where you have, a new case that's created by an email or, some web post or something like that from a form. And then, you work on the case, and then you close it either, or a call or something like that, and you can work on it and resolve it, give them the answer they're looking for, and so on. Then next most common is maybe there's a little bit of back and forth. You dash them for an order number, for some follow-up information. And then as you keep kind of going through and adding, different kind of variants to that, you eventually end up with a whole process. And here we've got a very simple one, but we can see that there are some steps that are taken very often, some that are less so, and things like that. And you can actually look and see what the real process is based on the data.
That's amazing. Can you dig into the less sort of frequent processes on? I know you showed the top one, but if you selected one of those less frequent processes, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, you can look at one of the ones that's only one-off. So this is something where it actually had multiple steps. So it actually probably went through waiting for customer, waiting for agent multiple times. So this is one there was you can see the amount of times. This is one single record that went through into working, into waiting for customer, into waiting for agent 5 times and 4 times had to go back and forth and talk to this customer before eventually getting closed. So not very common that you have that many loops, if you will. Then some of the other like less common ones might include like being put on hold for some amount of time and also having some back and forth and things like that. And if you select all of them, you can actually like hover over each of these and see what that particular process is too in the visualization. So you can get a general sense of where are you spending most of your time by hovering over kind of the most common happy paths, but also what are the weird edge cases? Do any of those make sense? Are those one-off like data issues and things like that? We also have like the ability to filter out things. Like we can, for example, look at only variants that have 2 or more. In this case, it's all the same steps that happen, but there's a little, a few less of those like one-off ones that go back and forth like 5 or 6 times and things like that.
Yeah, every time I see process, like it's just so amazing that we're sitting on the Salesforce platform, and the fact that this is the first time that process mining has been built on the Salesforce platform is pretty incredible. How long does it actually take to get to this place? Like, what are the steps for me to actually visualize the cases that I'm doing right here?
Yeah, totally. It's minutes. So we have a little wizard right now. We're actually working on potentially even updating that to be faster and having some default stuff. But you have the ability to define a new process definition. This is once you've installed it, this will be your first step, right? You give yourself permissions to the app, and then you can go ahead and create a visualization. And there's a wizard. You just step through it, and then it'll pick a little longer date frame maybe. And then you can go ahead and usually within a few minutes, it'll go ahead and create a view for you that you can go and look at, and that'll end up looking something like this. And that's literally just going through the wizard. You can add additional fields and things like that if you want to pull them in. Often people have, custom fields that they feel like segments their business in some way, or might be like, the particular kind of attributes that might impact their process the most. We pull in some by default, but of course, people can go in and customize that right in that wizard without having to do any like actual data work. You have the ability to as well if you want to pull in data from outside of Salesforce and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, it's still native Salesforce platform data that we're pulling from to create this visualization. So you can always load that in. We have a custom object that allows you to like log events and things like that. So if you did want to pull in supplemental information from outside, totally possible. But most of the time, happy path, you install it, you run the wizard, and you end on a visualization that looks like this, and you can see what your data really looks like in Salesforce.
Yeah, and so because of the pre-configured views, looking at cases, for example, it makes it easy enough that even a business analyst can get in there and just dig in right away to start really understanding what's happening in the customer service side of the business on top of Salesforce, which is pretty cool. And then there's oftentimes, we looked at the different variants that are in there, but the concept of the sort of different case types that might be run through a service center. Is there ways to look at the different types?
Yeah. So all of those supplemental attributes and stuff like that, like we mentioned, we pull in some by default. Case type is certainly one of them. All of these segments have the ability to go and be drilled down into. And that allows you to see kind of the breakdown of what is happening at that particular step in the process. And so you have standard filters like you would with reports and things like that, of course. But this drill down feature is specific to steps in the process. And that's one of the main differences between like standard reporting and process mining that you'll be able to see is the ability to see these kind of snapshots at every part of the process. And so if you really want to break down a process, you're not just going to be able to look at the end result of records and say, oh, this case took 3 days and this case took 2 days. Maybe that's a case type difference. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but maybe there's a particular step where a particular case type is heavily impacting, right? So for example, waiting for customer is one of our slowest steps. We can see that it's this like red line here. It takes 4 days on average. And then either that then gets closed or ends up, going back and waiting for an agent. And both of these, we have the ability to kind of drill into, and that'll show us the breakdown of, how many days on average. We can see there's like some outliers here. We could include or exclude those if we wanted to, or we can just look at everything. And we can actually see the breakdown of, oh, okay, well, order statuses, those are pretty quick. People just ask what their status of their order is. Someone looks it up, gives them the answer, simple. But this gift card and promotions case type has 16 days on average while we're waiting for the customer, right? There might be this back and forth where we're like asking them for gift card information that they don't have anymore because they've thrown it out, or maybe we need to refund them something based on a gift card, but because it's a gift card and they've thrown it out already, we can't give the money back to their original payment method. So it requires some back and forth where we get their credit card information to refund. Lots of different things that could potentially be going wrong there, right? Like, it's going to depend on the process, but the ability to be able to, drill in and see where we're actually spending time at any individual step is very powerful to like diagnosing issues, figuring out where your bottlenecks are, figuring out if there's an area of focus that you should really be spending time on, or with new things like Agentforce, like, is that maybe where you want to train your first agents to really help speed up processes that are currently taking a lot of time. And you can do this for any attribute. We know we've just pulled in a few, but for example, we could also see like by owner and things like that to see if there's dramatic differences by users. Are there new people who are struggling? Are there experienced agents who have got this figured out that we should probably be asking about, what are their tips and tricks, things like that. Lots of different things that you can pull in and drill in and actually see, where are we spending time? Where are my outliers? What are my happy paths? Things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when you go into the owner view, if you're a business analyst or a process or a call center sort of owner, being able to sort of visualize and understand quickly what's going on with those happy paths or not, this would help you understand which stakeholders you might want to interview in deeper ways and get an understanding of what's happening there. Yeah,
very
absolutely. Cool. Very cool. All right, and so then obviously the next step in these processes, and once you've identified specific areas, is obviously getting through a design session, like you said, whether we're rolling out a new agent inside of Agentforce or whether we're building new automation on Salesforce. There's oftentimes, if you're working inside of a brownfield org, there's a lot of stuff already built and happening in that org, and this can complicate what's actually happening in the build that you're trying to achieve. And this is where sort of the next step of what we were looking at comes in. This is Hubbl Diagnostics. So I'll share a little bit here.
Absolutely.
Essentially, Hubbl Diagnostics is allowing you to look at the metadata of the Salesforce org and get an understanding of how that org is configured. And so in minutes, this allows you to understand and get a personalized game plan as to how to optimize the org. And it's not just focused entirely on customer service or the case object. It looks across the entire org. We'll dig into the case object as an example here, but this allows you to, if you are focused on optimizing a specific process, you can dig into that object, get an understanding of what might be slowing you down as you go into that rollout. And so if we take a look at what's actually happening inside of Hubbl Diagnostics, once you connect Hubbl to the org, you can actually generate a set of visualizations that allow you to understand what's happening inside that org. So this is the object automation tab. So you can imagine if we were designing something on top of case, we'd want to understand what the different automations are inside of the case object already that we might be able to leverage or get an understanding of what's happening in there. And so this view, what it's showing you is all the objects in this particular Salesforce org and the number of automations associated to them. So the larger the circle here, the more automations built on top of it. We're specifically focused on the case object for this conversation, so we can dig into the case object and get a sense of what's actually happening on this case object from an automation perspective. And this shows you everything from the triggers, workflows, flows, and process builders in the org. We can also go in and filter through whether I'm looking at a specific cloud. Maybe I just want to look at all of the active automations that are on the case object, because obviously the inactive ones are not doing anything. I might want to get an understanding and maybe leverage something that was built in the past that's not active right now or in progress, but this allows you to visualize all of those. Another key thing when you're trying to understand what automation is already built on these objects is just essentially what are these automations actually doing? And one of the things we've found is that as we look across all the orgs that we've analyzed inside of Hubbl is that around 20% of the metadata in an org has no documentation on it at all in terms of descriptions of what's actually happening in this particular piece of code. So what you can do is you can actually leverage our pre-built prompts and the Swantide AI assistant to actually go in and get an understanding of what's happening on this particular piece of code. So this allows you to essentially unravel much more quickly what is going on this automation that's inside of the case object. So you can actually look at how you want to better design your future automations that are in here. So right now, just dumping that pre-built prompt into the code, we're actually, Swantide is actually generating the details around this particular trigger that's on this this case object, and this allows you to get that better understanding of what's happening there. Now, this also can go even deeper. So if you're looking at not only the automation that's built on top of it, the metadata that's on top of it, oftentimes you want to understand how are the fields actually being utilized on this particular object. So since we're digging into case, we can take a look at the field utilization on the case object itself. And so what this visualization is showing you is how all those fields that may be part of that process that are supporting the work that you want to be doing on the case object are being utilized in the org. And so each of these fields, what Hubbl Diagnostics is doing is looking at the records that are on that object, and then the number of those records that actually have a value populated inside of them. So you can see in terms of this volume usage field, 78 of those records actually have a value there. And so this helps you understand when you're designing those automations, whether there's existing fields that you might be able to leverage or fields that you want to steer clear of in terms of fields that are not being utilized by the team. Again, you can filter through this, get an understanding of how these fields are added to the case object. So maybe I just want to look at the ones that aren't namespaced. They aren't coming from a package that's been installed. And what this allows you to do is basically clean out and maybe optimize, maybe some of those, from the interviews you're having and understanding the slower parts of those processes. Sometimes there's just so many fields on a case object that it's slowing down the end users. And by cleaning out these fields, you can actually speed up the team in general. All right, and so that's looking at field utilization. Another thing that oftentimes, like I mentioned, because we're looking across the entire org and getting understanding what's happening across the entire org, sometimes there's these issues that we uncover with regards to high security issues inside of that particular org. And so, for example, if you have classes that might be involved in the automation related to the case object, you would definitely want to clean these up. And this is another example where you can go in and actually get an understanding of how you can actually automatically generate code using the AI assistant that can help you clean up the technical debt that might be residing in your org. Because when you're going through this optimization process in your customer service, you obviously want to optimize the process for efficiency and gaining efficiency inside of the organization, but you also want to make sure that your call center orders, if you have customer facing experience cloud type capabilities, you want to make sure that's secure as well. All right. So now you can imagine that once we've designed and done that outcome, what we're actually moving into now is getting an understanding of, if we've done that implementation, how we can actually visualize the automation that you've built and how it's made an impact on the organization in your call center. So this is an example of how you can now leverage that same process mining capability we were talking about in that discovery sense, but now leveraging it from an ROI visualization.
Yeah, absolutely. So dive right into that actual exact example where we've got that side-by-side comparison. And so like you mentioned, like when we're in the visualization, we have the ability to go ahead and save views and save all the filters and variants and stuff that we've gone and configured. Often that is like a before and after use case, right? Where we can see, okay, well, before we made these changes, it looked one way. After, maybe it looks the same way in terms of most of the same steps. But then I can actually go and overlay these on top of each other and actually see where am I saving time, right? And so here I'm saving, I'm going from 1 hour to 18 minutes. Here I'm saving, from 2 weeks of waiting for the customer down to 4 days. That's a pretty significant time save, right? So you can see some places, yeah, you're saving minutes here and there. Other places you're saving multiple days, especially in these waiting stages. So in the case of adding automations and automatic follow-ups or conversations with agents, things like that, that's going to be where you can save a lot of time in places where things were just sitting there doing nothing, because it takes a person to go in and move those along sometimes. But when you build these automations or agents and things like that, they can pick up, where people normally like have to go and manually intervene with things like that. So very powerful place to like focus your automation and stuff like that if you're trying to just get things moving along. But you can do this with so many different things, right? This is a before and after use case, but any two types of views that you want to compare to each other, you might want to look at a brand new employee versus your top performer. You might want to look at how a particular product does compared to the overall average. There's lots of different ways that you can compare two views side by side and then figure out what the differences are in the process, right? Not just like end results or like looking at like the dotted line at the end of the day. You can actually see if there are particular steps that some attribute struggles with more than others, whether that's time, people, or particular like types or classifications or products or whatever. So lots of powerful stuff you can do there to be able to compare reports to each other effectively.
That's interesting, because it's basically you can imagine rolling out an agent or a new automation in that process, visualizing that ROI to your executive stakeholders, but not only using these comparisons for those visualizations, but also doing essentially a change management type of engagement where your change management team can even understand and visualize what's happened inside the organization. And then they could be building content based on how to train new employees based on them understanding what the actual process is and how everything's working right there.
Yeah, absolutely. The adoption use case is definitely very strong, because often it's very hard to see where individual people struggle in a new process, right? Like sometimes it's obvious, but more often than not, you end up getting kind of the loud minority who will complain about certain features. And it might be that a lot of people have no issues with those features, and there's another feature that no one's really talking about because your loud folks have figured that one out. And then everyone's been struggling with that, and you just don't see it. So
and I mean one of the ones I've seen is where you have sort of new CIO coming in, trying to understand the organization. They've brought in some new resources that are engaged in a call center, and they're trying to onboard those new resources into the organization, right? And so being able to have these visualizations plus get an understanding of what all the automations and everything that are happening in the call center basically allows them to get onboarded much more quickly into their Salesforce organization, as opposed to having to dig through the thousands of pieces of metadata and data all themselves, right?
Definitely. Plus, automated agents don't complain, so they're not going to tell you if there's anything wrong in the process, right? So you need a way to dive deeper in and be able to actually look in and see where they might be getting stuck up and things like that too. So
yeah, that's absolutely critical. And then obviously, sort of the fourth bullet point there was, okay, now let's say we've focused it on case and we've identified some challenges there inside a case. The next step, even if you think about it from an Agentforce perspective, maybe you've leveraged the new service agents that are out there, but now you're trying to understand where in my custom processes am I actually going to find something new that I can make more efficient. And that's where sort of the breadth of the capabilities across both diagnostics and process analytics allows you to dig into any object inside of the org and get an understanding of what's happening there. So let's take a look at how you'd actually just build a view on a custom object, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we'll go into our new process definition wizard here. And we have the ability to pick custom data source as well, right? We have some predefined stuff for opportunity and case. We'll probably have some more stuff coming out with a few other like standard objects. But of course, like processes in Salesforce can be anything, right? You have the ability to fully customize that. You might even want to build like a more custom view using multiple objects, even on standard objects, right? One of our most common use cases, and the one I'll kind of walk through here just because I think it'll be familiar for everyone, is a lead plus opportunity use case. So we might do like leads plus opportunities. And for that, we'll have our base object be our opportunity. And then we'll use the stage field as our kind of like main step field, which represents like, progression through that process. And we'll also pick multi-object here. And so what that'll do is it'll automatically pull in any related objects in the org to your primary object. And so here we'll pull in leads By default, if it only has one lookup, it'll know what it is. And then also we can pull in status on this lead here. And so we'll just pull in that one. But if we wanted to, we could also pull in, other related objects as well, events, tasks. Sometimes we'll pull in like emails and things like that. And we can kind of go through that process, visualize that. Again, we can kind of pull in, by default, it won't pull in anything, but we can pull in, any of the kind of custom fields that we want to be able to then, go and visualize that. And again, we'll pick a time frame. And we can go ahead and, run with that. And that'll give us something that looks something probably like this, where we have kind of this like lead process that leads into an opportunity process or anything like that. But this could also be, a custom project object, or we've seen like in the education space, like, applications and things like that as well. Lots of different like custom use cases, of course, that are supported as well. Basically anything that has a standard kind of step or stage field that represents moving through a process, you can do with the wizard. And then of course we also have the ability to behind the scenes go in and do some data work to really flesh this out with data that comes maybe even from outside of Salesforce, or from custom objects that don't necessarily have that same kind of like status or step. But still have maybe like date milestones or things like that you want to track as well. So lots of different ways to get to this visualization. That's certainly the happy path, easy way of doing it, where you can then go and just visualize something, quickly in minutes, even including multiple objects and things like that, and how they relate to each other and so on. So pretty powerful.
And then obviously all the sort of the process we were going through before, where you can if you just focus on the most frequent, or you can drill down into these, that allows you as a team to dig through what's actually happening with this these custom, either a single custom object or the multiple objects that you're visualizing here.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely like the ability to go in and drill in and filter and pick the specific variants you care about, right? There might be a particular step you're interested in. You might have a hypothesis and you want to be able to just pick anything that includes that one step, and that'll change the variants that get picked so that you're only looking at anything that includes a particular step. There's some really cool stuff too that you don't have in standard reporting, like the ability to only take the records where one step happened and then another step happened immediately afterwards or eventually afterwards and things like that, because you have this concept of the steps that were taken in the process, which can be really interesting from a reporting perspective, just standard reporting, even just to be able to differentiate records that have like gone through a certain series of steps versus other records that haven't, just to see what the differences are between them. Sometimes that can be really powerful too, because most of the time you just get that end state, and having the intermediate steps as part of your reporting structure like really allows you to get some really in-depth insights, especially when you've got kind of some ideas but don't really know how to like separate out things that have gone through a certain step or not.
Amazing. All right, and so in terms of if you're interested in actually leveraging these products, Process Analytics is what we're looking at right now is an App Exchange app that you can grab from the App Exchange. And then Hubbl Diagnostics, you can create an account at hubbl.com to get started really quickly. Both of these products, you have a freemium version, so you can get in right away. You can start looking at your case processes inside of Process Analytics. You can also look at the field utilization, as well as other details inside of Hubbl Diagnostics on the case object if you're focused on customer service. And then if you want to upgrade into the full capabilities, we have promo pricing right now where you can access both of these products for $10,000 for your organization. That includes your production instance and sandboxes. And if you bundle them together, there's a discount there as well. And so with that, we thank everyone for your time and attention, and happy optimizing your customer service support center. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Cheers.